Hello everyone, I'm so happy you could join me in the virtual space today to learn a little bit about how to crochet. So a couple things. Some of you might be thinking, like, I've heard the word, but what does it really mean? So crocheting, or knitting, they're two different things, is the process of taking a ropey material and looping it using a tool. So for crocheting, that tool is a hook. So it's a straight needle with a little hook at the end, and they can be plastic or metal, and they come in a bunch of different sizes. These are some of the bigger ones that I have. That is different from knitting. Knitting uses two needles that are both straight. See, there's no hook at the end of these. But that's for knitting, and we're not going to do that today. I just wanted to show you what the difference was, because sometimes it's hard to keep them straight. So all you need for crocheting is a little bit of yarn. If you're like me, you have a ton of that stuff laying around. I have way too much of it, don't get me started on that. And a hook. But if you don't have a hook and you don't have any pre-made yarn, that's okay. I'm going to show you how to knit or crochet. See, I'm getting confused. Crochet with nothing but some yarn and your fingers. If you don't have yarn, that's all right. Hopefully you saw our description and you grabbed an old t-shirt. So the really cool thing is that you can make some pretty awesome yarn out of an old t-shirt. So this is one that I grabbed that doesn't quite fit me anymore, so we're gonna cut that up and make it into some fun yarn first, and then I'll show you how to use it to make something really cool. Okay, so you want to grab your t-shirt and you want to lay it out flat. You don't want any creases or anything underneath, because that will give you some uneven cuts. And then you also want to make sure you have a pair of scissors handy. These are my trusty fabric scissors. The only thing I ever use them on is fabric, but any regular scissors will be fine. If you have any tags on the inside of your shirt like I do, you can either cut them out or just rip them out. It all comes out the same. And then just toss your tag into the trash. Okay. So, ideally, your t-shirt isn't screen printed. That means if you have any t-shirts that have a design on them, but the design is kind of like hard, and if you wear the shirt for long enough and wash it a few times, it starts to crack. But it's okay if you do. Really, the only thing is anywhere that it's screen printed will just be a little bit thicker. Same thing with any seams that are in the fabric. They're fine, it'll just be a little bit thicker wherever that is at. So you want to lay it out flat, make sure there's no bumps or lumps or anything in it. Okay. Now you can, if you really want to get your fabric as smooth as possible, you'll want to cut off the bottom hem. That is the little bit of fabric at the bottom of your shirt that's like folded over and it's a little bit thicker than the rest of the shirt. So we'll take our scissors and we'll just trim the bottom off. And don't worry if your cut's a little crooked or anything, it'll all work out in the end. Okay, so we cut our hem off, we can ignore that now. Okay, so now what you want to do is we're going to cut strips along the length of the shirt, starting at the bottom, working our way to the top. So you want them about an inch thick. That's roughly the size of that bone between your first two joints in your finger. But it doesn't have to be super precise. It can be a little bit one way or the other, but try to keep the relative same thickness to all of your strips as you go. So that's the first thing. Second thing we want to remember is we don't want to cut all the way through the edge on the opposite side. So as you start cutting, you want to stop about an inch away from the edge of the fabric. Okay, so about the same thickness as your strips. So I'm going to start cutting here on this side. Now it's easier if you see I'm trying to keep everything kind of on the ground, and you can hear my scissors are like running along the edge of the floor here. That's helping me keep everything stable so that I'm not running all over the place with these. Okay, so then I got to over to here at the edge and I stopped. There's still about an inch of space there. Okay, so that's one strip. And you see I'm a little jagged here. That's okay. I'm not going to worry about that. So we're just going to move on and do some similar cuts all the way up. So this will probably be my last row here. Yep. Okay. So this last one, since this is my last one, I am going to cut all the way over the edge and get rid of the top of that shirt there. Okay. So now, you got something that kind of looks like this. You got all your strips, and you got this piece in the middle that's still connecting them all together. Okay. If there's anywhere where you didn't quite get close enough to the edge, you can just give that a little extra snip. Okay. So now, doesn't matter which end you start on, but we're gonna kind of open up this little fold here in the middle. Okay. Let all your ties run down your arm. Okay. We're gonna open that up so that we're looking at that at that side seam. Okay. So here, oops, I didn't quite cut that whole seam off. That's okay. So we're gonna take our scissors and starting at the edge, we're gonna do a little diagonal cut up to this first edge right here between that separates the two. Okay, so I'm gonna cut from here and cut right there. So now that gives me a nice little strip. Okay, so if I follow that path around, I get to the opposite side. And look, I have a nice little V over here also, if you can see that. So now I'm going to cut a diagonal line from that over to that next spot. And it continues, keeps my continuous strip going. Okay? So we're going to cut through this center seam that we left all the way to the other end, keeping those diagonals going so that we can keep our shirt in one continuous piece. Okay, so you get to the end and you got your two on one side, one on the other. So we're going to do the same thing we did at the beginning, but in the opposite. We're going to cut right up to that edge so that we have a nice little tail at the end again. Okay. So now you have a big pile of this. It doesn't quite look like yarn yet. That's okay. So we're going to find one of our ends. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to stretch it. So we're going to, whatever is easiest for you, we're going to stretch it so it starts curling. Okay. You don't want to pull hard enough to break, but you can pull pretty hard on this. So as I'm stretching this, you can see it's starting to curl up. So it's not that nice flat that the rest of it is. Okay. So this is how we get our yarn out of it. Okay, so now we have our yarn. So if you're using your t-shirt yarn, awesome. You only need one ball. You can double it up if you did more than one shirt, but one strand is fine. If you didn't make the t-shirt yarn and instead are going to use some regular yarn that you already have, like I have a couple different ones here. Yes, I have a lot of yarn. You can, if I'm doing this, I like to double up on my yarns to make them thicker. Where's the end of my yarn? There it is. So like I would take two different ones, these two purples I like, and they kind of go together. So I would take those, maybe add some of this gray in, so that I'm working with multiple strands so it's nice and thick. It's about that thickness of that t-shirt yarn. But whichever one you want to do is up to you. I'm going to work with the t-shirt yarn right now, but I also like using some multiple ones. Maybe I'll switch up to that a little bit later to show you the difference. Okay, I'm going to scoot a little closer to the camera here. Okay, so you got your ball of yarn. Okay, so next tool you need is your hands. I'm going to take the end of it and your index finger of either hand. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to use my right hand, but if you're left-handed, you can do this the same thing. You just got to mirror whatever I'm doing, okay? So, index finger is going to act like our hook, okay? So I'm going to take the end of my yarn, and I'm going to loop it around and get a slip knot in the end of it, okay? So it's called slip knot because if I take the tail and pull it, it comes undone, okay? So we're going to make a slip knot. You want to be careful that you don't get too close to the edge. You want to leave what's called a tail. This one's probably a little short, but I'm not making a huge project. So you want to leave probably about 6 inches. So the reason we do this is when we are done at the very end of the project, we're going to take the tail, and it's called weaving in your ends. We're going to weave it into the rest of the project to give it a nice clean look, and that helps make sure everything stays together and doesn't fall apart. Because remember, crocheting is all about making loops out of fabric with your hook. In this case, our hook is our index finger. Okay, so I got my slip knot. Again, just a little slower. I'm just taking it. I use my first two fingers, middle and index, and I just loop it around once, and then I tuck the tail under, and then I just pull that loop tight. Okay, pull it nice and tight. Okay, so I'm going to stick my index finger through it. Okay, so this is now what my hands look like. I'm going to hold my working yarn. That's the stuff that's still attached to the rest of the ball. It's called our working yarn. Okay, so I'm going to take that in my left hand to hold it taut, give it some tension, because if I'm trying to crochet like one-handed like this, it doesn't go too well. So I need a little something there to give some resistance to keep that, make it easier to work with. Okay. Then either I also like, at this point, I like holding on to the tail, because it helps keep everything, again, tension. It helps make it a little easier to work with everything, because I'm not trying to like work in midair, if that makes sense. So the first thing we're going to do is make a chain. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to take that index finger, I'm going to hook my finger around that yarn, and I'm going to pull it back through. So now I have a new loop on that. Okay, so this was my first loop because of that slip stitch. This is the loop we just made with our index finger. Okay, so I'm going to do that again. Okay, so now I have two chains on my stitch. So you might be going, oh, it's really cool, but that's a little hard. So cheat thing you can do is also stick your thumb through there and pinch and pull it back through. That's okay. Or if that's also a little tough, you can hook the yarn in your finger, drop your working yarn, get that out of your hand, pick up that loop and pull it over the end of your finger, and then pick your working yarn back up. That's also okay. That's a valid way to do this. Whatever's easiest for you. I don't do this too often, and my hands are currently like icicles. So that's why I'm putting my thumb through that loop. It just makes it a little easier because I'm not very dexterous right now. Okay, so you want to do a couple loops for your chain. See if you look at it, it's starting to look more like a chain. You might think of like a links of a chain or something like that. And if you see here, the way you count your chains, you see you got this like V here. So one V is one chain. So I'm going to do about 10 right now. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I need one more. Okay. So now I got 10 chains on my loop. You can do however many you want, however wide you want your project to be. What I'm showing you now is a basic, like if you were doing something like a scarf. This would be a really easy thing to do. So I'm gonna start with 10 because I don't need this to be too huge. Ooh, glasses are falling down. Okay. Okay, so you got your chain, you got your working yarn in your finger, in your hand. I wrap it around my finger a few times. That's just a habit I've picked up after doing this for years. I've been crocheting since I was about, oh gosh, I want to say 10 or something like that. So I've been doing this for about 16 years. Things that make me feel old. Okay, so next thing you want to do is we're going to start our next row. So this chain is our foundation row. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do, my index finger's still through that loop. I still got my working yarn. I'm now pinching the rest of the chain in my left hand. It just makes it a little easier to work with. Again, you want to be able to hold it in some way so that you're not flopping around in the midair. You want to ground yourself with what you're doing. Okay, so I'm going back down to this. I'm skipping that last chain that I did, and I'm putting my finger through in between that V of the next chain, and then I'm gonna loop some yarn around my finger and pull it through. Okay, so now I got 2 loops, loop 1, loop 2, hanging from my finger. Now we're not gonna pass this one over this one just yet. What we want to do is wrap that working yarn around your index finger again, and this last little loop we just made, we're going to pull through both of these other loops. Okay, so you might find it easier at the moment to kind of hold on, pinch everything here and work those 2 loops off like that. That's okay. But you want to pull that 1 loop through those other 2, and now you're back with 1 loop. And this is now a single crochet, okay, is what that's called. So we got our chains, that's that little V that we made to start, and we have our single crochet. So we're going to go down our chains, sticking our hook through that V, grabbing on our yarn, pulling it through so that we get 2 loops, okay? And if you see, I keep kind of readjusting how tight those loops are. That's just something that it takes lots and lots of practice to get. It's called your tension right and consistent. Like I said, I've been doing this for over 16 years, and I still struggle with tension on certain projects if I'm learning a new stitch or just trying something different. It's just something you gotta kind of, it's like anything else, like if you're memorizing your lines for a show or doing homework for school for math or writing something or learning a new language. It just takes practice. So don't worry about if your hands are having a little bit of trouble with this. Okay? So I did another one. We're going to go down the row and keep doing those. So remember, we want to stick our finger in, pull up a loop, get another loop over that, and pull it through. Like I said, my hands are really cold right now, so this is a little difficult for me. So make sure you have warm hands whenever you're doing this, because it gets a little harder if they're not. So again, going through that top loop, pulling another loop up, so we have 2 on there, wrap it around. I'm going to do it this way, because that's a little easier on my hands right now. Okay, back to 1 loop, loop it through again, looping around. Oops, I slipped off. That's okay, and that's okay. You stick your finger, stick your hook back through that hole, and it's all okay. Okay, so we're going to get to the end of our row here. Okay, and back to that first chain we did. Okay, so now I'm going to pull out a big loop so I don't accidentally undo it. So now you got something that kind of looks like this. So we had our foundation chain, and then we did single crochets all the way across. So that's our first row. Okay, so you should have 9 of these now, because if you were like me and made 10. I messed up somewhere. Oh no, I just pulled the one too tight. I pulled it too tight, but that's okay. So that's our single crochet. So if you look at the top of this, you see those V's again that we had from our chain row, okay? So that's important for this next row that we're going to do, okay? So we're at the end of the row. What do we do now? So we're going to do another chain. So just that 1 loop, we're going to loop our finger around and pull through. So the reason we do this is it gives a little bit of a height to that first stitch as we're going back through, so that the entire row stays relatively the same height. Okay, so I mentioned that V. So we now got this first V here. You can see that as I'm looking at the top of it. So we're going to stick our finger under both of those. So I now have this loop on my finger and the 2 sides of that V from that single crochet. So I'm going to do the same exact thing as I did in that first row. I'm going to pull up another loop, loop it around, so I got 3 on my fingers right here, and then I'm going to tuck or move those top 2 over so I'm back to 1. And then just the same thing, rinse and repeat. Okay, so every now and then it's good to go back through and count your stitches to make sure you didn't miss one, and that you're still consistent, because if you start doing more or less, your project is going to get a weird little shape to it. The edges are going to ripple a little bit, or start like really wide at the bottom and go really tight or something like that. But like I said, it's all just practice. So if you did happen to skip a stitch, but you're all the way at the end and you missed one in the middle, it's all okay. The really easy thing to do with this, so I took my hands out, took my hook out, dropped my yarn. What I can do is just pull, and it unravels back to wherever that spot was that I went whoops to fix. So it's really easy to fix things with crochet. Okay, so we got to our end. We're going to do the same thing we did the other side, and we're just going to do 1 chain, okay? And then flip our project around and keep going with those single crochets. You got all these V's. That's what we're working through. Okay. So I'm going to go until I can get to the end of this yarn ball, and then I can show you guys how to start a new one if you were like me and your seams came apart a little bit because you pulled a little too hard, or just if you want to make a bigger project and one t-shirt isn't quite enough for the project that you're doing. So the reason I started crocheting when I was so young was my mom had picked up the hobby, and her and I actually ended up making a blanket together. When we were relaxing in the evening and watching some TV together, we would take turns knitting or crocheting. See, I'm interchanging the words now too, and I shouldn't. It's a terrible habit. We would take turns crocheting rows together. I would do a couple, she would do a couple, and we'd go back and forth on that. And I think she still has that blanket somewhere too. I'll have to ask her. But it's a fun thing to do in the evening to keep your hands busy if you're a little restless. I know it keeps me from snacking sometimes. That boredom snacking. I'm not actually hungry, but I need something to do with my hands. Or I just got a little too much energy, but I can't like go out, or it's like too late in the evening to really do anything with anybody. I can just pick up my crocheting and get rid of some of that energy while also being productive and creative and making something. I really love making things. I like the process of watching people make things. That's always fascinated me and been of interest to me. Okay, so I've now come to the end of that one yarn ball, and I'm like, oh no, this isn't as big as I wanted this. I want to add a little bit more yarn onto it. So I'm going to grab a second ball of yarn and pull my tail out. So I have a place to start. Okay, so there are a couple ways I can do this. The really simple one is I can just make a little loop and do a square knot like how you tie your shoes. So that's one option to do. And then, so when you crochet this, you'll just have some extra ends to weave in. Like I talked about with this first one, that when we started, you'll just have to weave those in. If you're like, not really into that, because that's a lot of work and I want to try to avoid as many ends as I can. Another option you can do, like what I like to do, so I would start going on my next stitch like it normally would, but instead of looping around this little bit that's left, I'm going to start this next piece, and I'm just kind of holding it tight there. I'm going to loop that around my finger and pull that through, making sure I leave a little bit of an end there, and then pull all that tight. So this way I have less ends to weave in at the end of everything. It still gets my stitch in there, but I don't have a knot in the middle of that project. So now I got two ends here. What I'm going to do when I go for that next V, that next single crochet, I'm going to make sure those two are laying right on top so that they get trapped under that next stitch and that they don't come out. So you can see the spot I'm at has a bit of that screen printing on it, so I'm getting a little thicker yarn. But so as I'm working here, so I'm just making sure I tuck those two ends underneath that section. Okay, and then when I get to the end here, then I can take my scissors and trim off that end because they're woven in, and I don't have to worry about that coming undone, okay? And then I just keep going like I have been, making this as long as you want it to. Okay, so maybe that's all I wanted to do. It's going to be a nice little tiny pot holder for me. So the way to finish a project is real simple. So you made that last stitch. We're going to do another chain just to kind of finish that end off. And then we're going to take our scissors, put those trusty scissors back in, and I want to leave, just like we did at the beginning, I want to make sure I have a little tail, so I like to pull my loop nice and big here, and then I cut at the top of that loop, okay? And then I pull my working yarn back out, so I'm left with an end. So like I said, since I'm not going to weave those ends in, I'm just going to carefully, very carefully, so that I don't cut through anything, chop those off and throw those away. So now that end is like nice and even. I don't have those tails poking out. But I have two other tails to deal with. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the end, and if you're working with something smaller and you have a tapestry needle, a needle with a really large eye in it, you can use that. But since these are so big, it's really easy to just use your fingers to weave this back through any of those holes that you see, so that it stays nice and even. I'm just weaving it, working it back through that top row. And now I'm gonna turn around and go back through my holes. Just whatever direction you need to go to keep that tail from coming loose. And this is the reason you want a nice long tail, because if it's really short, it's not going to stay in there very well. But the longer it is, the more I can weave it through the rest of the project, the easier it is going to be to keep it in there and keep it hidden. Tuck that end down in. And there's no right way or wrong way to weave your ends in. It's just however you want it to make it look how you want it to look. So I did that one. You can't really tell it's in there. It's nice and hidden. And then I go back to the other side and I do the same thing with that end, just weaving it through whatever hole is available to tuck that away so that it doesn't come undone. My project stays nice and simple. And then once that's done, you're done. It's nice and simple. So like I said, depending on what you're making, it's going to depend on how long it takes. Like I said, I'm probably going to use this as a pot holder. So it's nice and thick, it'll keep that heat off my table. But that's how you crochet. Like I said, you can do it with t-shirt yarn, or you can do it with a couple other strands run together. That's also super easy. Same exact principle. You can do the same exact thing you did with the t-shirt yarn. You're just holding more strands together. You got a few more things rolling around next to you than just the one ball of t-shirt yarn, but it's the same principle. I like doing this sometimes because then I can mix colors together and get some really cool effects. But that's up to you, whatever resources you have, or whatever you're trying to make and however you want it to look. That's totally up to you. Okay, so I'm going to stop, otherwise I will sit here all day and crochet, and I have some other work to do. So, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat section. I'll be more than happy to answer whatever questions I can. I hope you enjoyed learning how to crochet, and I hope it's something you continue doing. Like I said, it's a good habit to pick up. It's if you're like me and you like making things, or it's just also it's nice, calming, relaxing thing to do at the end of the day to kind of like refocus yourself on something. make progress on something if you're having a stressful day at work or something like that. So yeah, thank you for coming. I'm glad that you're here.